just subscribe below, and if you enjoy this, find it helpful, please leave a comment and give it a thumbs up.
Dragon's Fire, Part 1. As you listen to this bedtime story, you can let your eyes close and you can begin to drift comfortably asleep as I talk to you in the background. And while I'm talking to you, you relax and you drift comfortably asleep. You can begin to just imagine the story playing out in your mind. And one morning, Hyland, the wizard's apprentice, awoke to the sounds of screaming that he could hear off in the distance from the nearby village. Hyland lived in a shack along the coast from the village. He jumped up out of bed, got a robe on, and ran out of his shack. He didn't know what was going on or how he might be able to help. He just knew he had to try and do something. He started to run along the soft sandy beach, with the gentle clear blue water lapping on the shore to his left, and meadow leading off to a wooded valley off to the right. He could notice the clear blue sky with almost no clouds in the sky, apart from smoke that was bellowing up into the air above the village. As he ran, he could notice that there was a dragon circling the village, swooping down, breathing fire across the village, then bursting up through the smoke, high into the sky again, before swooping round again and diving back down on the village, breathing more fire. And each burst of fire from the dragon's mouth sounded like a jet engine, with the sound of crackling wood, flames rising up above the houses. The dragon was red, with huge wings, a long neck, and piercing eyes. As Hyland approached the village, he passed through the village wall. Everything was in chaos. People were running around everywhere. People were screaming for their loved ones. Houses were falling down, other buildings were falling down. His teacher, the wizard, was in the town square, trying to use his magic to defeat the dragon. He was trying to create a protective force field around the villagers, around the village, whilst at the same time trying to use magic to blast that red dragon out of the sky. The dragon started circling around and trying to go for the wizard. The protective blue force field emanating from the wizard was spreading out further and further into the village, protecting more and more people. But Hyland could see that the wizard was struggling to be able to do a spell to project a force field out to protect everyone, whilst at the same time trying to fight the dragon, because Hyland noticed the wizard wasn't able to fire through his own force field, so he'd have to keep dropping the force field at exactly the same moment as he fires energy at the dragon, and then reinstigate the force field just as the energy passes where the force field should be. But this kept giving the dragon an opportunity to fire back, to breathe down searing fire upon the wizard and the village. Hyland saw that a building was about to collapse. So as he ran along, he quickly darted into the building, grabbing some people and jumping out a window, just as the building was falling down the opposite direction, before reaching the ground, rolling on the ground, and rolling the people to safety along the ground. And then running further towards the town square. Rescuing different people as he went. Using magic to temporarily stop falling buildings, just centimetres above people that the masonry, the timber is about to hit, to give them moments just to squeeze out and escape before allowing the building to continue falling. Sending shields to protect people as the dragon dive bombed and breathed fire. And Hyland was by no means a skilled magician or a skilled wizard. He was still only learning. Just as he was nearing the town square, he saw the dragon circle round and this time fly in very low. And the dragon this time didn't just breathe fire. It charged headlong through the wall to the village and straight through the houses whilst breathing fire forward. Before crashing directly into the force field created by the wizard, which created a bright white flash of light and heat. And the dragon struck the force field, flying vertically at high speed up into the sky, while the wizard was thrown across the town square, straight through some buildings, collapsing in a heap on the floor, not moving. Hyland did what he could. He ran forward into the town square, tried to take up the role that his mentor had been doing, tried to continue fighting off that dragon, protecting the village. But he was no match for the dragon. The dragon circled around again, dive-bombed the village again. He told everyone to run out through the break in the village wall, run down to the beach, run down to the caves along the seafront, and go and find shelter in the caves. As the villagers ran out of the village and down to the seafront, Hyland cast a spell, creating a force field high above him, in line with the dragon. He wasn't able to create a force field that covered the whole village, but he was able to create a force field strong enough to protect from the fire, but it was very targeted. So he had to hold it in line with the dragon. And the dragon continued diving and breathing fire. And Hyland held it as long as he could, before the dragon turned and swooped back up away again, and circled around. And this time, as the dragon circled around, it did a wide circle and it didn't seem to be coming back. Hyland ran over to the wizard. The wizard was badly injured. He spoke to his mentor. His mentor said that he would have to learn to take out the dragons. The dragons have come back to the land. And that unless somebody can take out all of the dragons that have come back, the dragon in each realm of the land, and take out the black dragon, which has arisen again, then nobody will be safe, and death and darkness will descend across the whole land. Hyland didn't know how he was going to be able to do this, so he asked what he needs to do, and he was told he needs to find a team of people, a team that can go with him, that have different skills. He was told he needs to Go and find Fezler the elf, Kroger the dwarf, and the siren Piper. And he needs to take that small team, convince them to go on a journey through the realms, to take out the dragons that are intent on bringing death and destruction. He needs to learn the skills to achieve this and work together with the others. And that it's only when he's mastered the mind, the body, the spirit, mastered magic, and then achieved enlightenment, that he'll be able to successfully take out the black dragon. And he was told that to achieve enlightenment, he has to find the Book of Enlightenment. Which will be in a cave in the realm of death. It's only when he's got that Book of Enlightenment he'll be able to have the knowledge and the skill to take out the black dragon. So Hyland decided to find this team and to go after these dragons. He didn't think he was experienced enough, but if the wizard believed in him, he should believe in himself. He knew that the villagers would be able to handle things themselves. They'd be able to take care of themselves, and now the dragon's gone, be able to put out the fires and tend to the injured. And use the caves for safe haven for now. Hyland head down to the coast. Head down to the caves. To search for the dwarf Kroger. He had to go down to the caves that were some distance from the village. So he walked down to the seafront. Walked along the seafront, he could see all the caves that the villagers were occupying. He walked down onto the golden sand, all the way down to the water's edge, where he could feel the water lapping over his feet as he walked along. He could hear the water sloshing in and back out again. And feel the sea breeze on his face. And he walked along here to keep away from all of the rocks, because it was going to be quicker if he just kept walking along this area than having to climb over rocks and navigate slightly further into the shore. After a few hours of walking, Hyland saw the cave region where the dwarves lived. And the dwarves usually kept themselves to themselves. Occasionally the dwarves would be found in the village. Some of them would pop to the village and go drinking in the taverns in the village. But usually they kept themselves to themselves. And the dwarves were short and stocky, and yet incredibly strong, almost like they were made largely out of muscle. They're often very abrupt and direct. And they didn't like people beating around the bush. They liked people to be direct with them. And Hyland asked where Kroger was. And the dwarves at the entrance to the dwarven underground caves directed him deep into the caves. So he walked into the caves, and these caves went down deeper and deeper, so he followed the steps down into the caves deeper and deeper as he hunted for the dwarf. And he could hear parties going on, dwarves singing and drinking. He could see some dwarves working with pickaxes, mining for different ores. Other dwarves were beating leather, making clothes. There was dwarves working as blacksmiths, and the sound of hammering metal, the sound of metal being plunged into water, with the bubbling fizzing of white hot metal plunged into water. And Hyland found the place where Kroger lived. And he told Kroger about what had happened back in the village and what the wizard had told him. And Kroger at first was reluctant to help. But he said that if the village had the support of Kroger, Hyland said he's sure that they would pay handsomely. So Kroger agreed to go with him and go on this journey. He thought it sounded fun. He liked a good fight. He liked a good opportunity to demonstrate his skill, his strength, his fearlessness. So Kroger and Hyland then found their way out of the caves, back to the beach. They then took a boat, a sailboat, sailed out into the sea, sailed over the breaking waves, out into the rolling waves, with the sloshing sound of the waves passing under the boat. And they held a course, keeping the shore on their left, and just a horizon of water on the right. They sailed along, with just the sound of the wind and the sloshing water, heading to some distant rocks where the sirens lived. And some of the sirens took enjoyment from singing and luring people to their death, while others were trying to break away from this instinctive behaviour. And so Hyland recommends that Kroger and himself plug their ears as they approach the rocks so that they can't hear any singing from the sirens, so they're not lured to their death. And they arrive at the rocks and they moor up, and they can see that there's sirens singing, but they can't hear the singing the sirens are doing. And they hunt for the siren piper. And she sat quietly up high on a rock with a contemplative expression, just gazing out over the ocean, not singing. So Hyland approaches Piper, and she's the most beautiful female he's ever seen. And he approaches her, unplugs his ears, and asks her if she'll join him on his quest. And he explains about what's happened at the village. He explains about these dragons coming back and how they will lead to death for everyone. So Piper agrees that she'll come on this journey, that she'll come on this quest. She likes the idea of being with people, of getting away from luring people to their deaths on this shore, on these rocks. She likes the idea of being treated as someone with value. So Hyland plugs up his ears again, and Piper, Hyland and Kroger go back and get in the boat and sail to shore. And after landing on shore, they go hunting for the elf Fezler. And Fezler lives up on a plateau, overseeing the valley below. So they struggle up to that plateau. And it's a steep climb, and they have to do rock climbing, and they have to help each other to climb to the top. The elves are experts at climbing. They're swift and agile. When they reach the plateau, they can gaze out to the mountains off in the distance, to the coast where they've just come up, and surveying the whole valley below. And they talk to the elves and they ask for Fezler and ask where he is. And they go and ask Fezler whether he'll help them on their quest. They explain about the black dragon, about the dragons returning. And Fezler agrees to go with them. And now the whole team is formed. They gaze out from the plateau over the valley, knowing that their next mission is to go down deep into the valley and find that red dragon that attacked the village, and take out the red dragon. But to do that requires developing the mind. And so the wizard apprentice knows, Hyland knows, his journey will develop his mind so that he's prepared with the others to take out that red dragon. Dragon's Fire Part 2. So as you listen to this, you can relax deeply and comfortably and just let yourself drift off to sleep while I just talk in the background. And Hyland and the rest of his group find their way down from the plateau into the valley below. And as they climb down from the plateau, they pass through a layer of clouds. They go below the clouds, seeing the tops of the green forests, before passing down deep into the forest, all the way down to the forest floor. And they start their journey walking through the forest, walking through the valley. This is the first realm that they need to clear. They need to find that red dragon. Hyland needs to learn mental skills. He needs to perfect his mind abilities to be able to defeat the red dragon. With Piper, Kroger and Fezler. As they find their way from the plateau down to the river that runs from the mountains to the ocean. And as he walks along, he can hear the sound of the thundering river. Notice the green of the trees overhead, and the deep dark brown wood. And everything's damp in this forest. And Hyland suggests that it's best if they follow the river. Because it's going to be more open, whereas the forest is thick and dense and difficult to navigate. Whereas along the edge of the river, they can navigate easier. But they have to be careful as they navigate along the edge of the river. Careful of all the wildlife that may be out to get them. They notice the giant crocodiles in the river, just floating there, seemingly impossibly floating there, with the river thundering along, so powerful and strong. And yet, the crocodiles are just floating there motionless, almost as if they're defying the force of the river. And in this valley, the forest extends throughout the valley and then up to the cloud line, up the sides of the valley, up the hills. And after some time walking and hacking through the valley, Kroger starts having a bad feeling. He starts feeling like there's something there. He doesn't know what. He just has this feeling like he's being watched. He knows it isn't the crocodiles, he can see them. He knows that they're probably watching, but he knows it's not them. They're not going to any effort to try and get from the water to these few people just on the shore. Then out the corner of his eye, Fezler's sure he's just seen some movement. Almost like a log has just moved. It's like a tree trunk, a fallen down tree trunk has just moved on the ground. Kroger realizes it's not a tree trunk. It's a meter-wide snake. And once it's noticed, it goes for them. It'd been carefully encircling the party, and now once it's noticed, it tightens quickly. Hyland, Piper, and Fezler managed to jump out the way. But it closes tightly around Kroger. And Kroger tightens up his muscles and he strengthens up and strains, and you can see the strain in his face. while the snake tightens up and tries to crush him. And Fezler the elf pulls out his elvish sword and he chops at the snake. And the first chop was like metal on metal. It was as if this snake had metal armour or metal scales protecting it. But the second chop was more successful. He chopped diagonally between the scales. But for a snake this large, it was just like a paper cut. It was painful and irritating, but not life-threatening. Fezler then flexed his muscles and his armour popped out with spikes. And he jumped in the way of the snake. And climbed inside the snake, climbed inside its mouth. And then from the inside, nobody could see what was going on, and yet from the inside, you could just hear slicing and dicing as Fezler moved himself around and spun himself around inside the snake and twisted and squirmed deeper and deeper into the snake, deeper and deeper into the snake's belly. And the snake let go of Kroger as it was busy trying to spit out the elf. And yet the elf wedged himself in there and worked his way deeper and deeper with his sword, with his spiked armour, slicing and dicing and cutting away at the inside of the snake, deeper and deeper into the snake, before erupting out of the middle of the snake. As the snake's head collapsed and the snake lay motionless, and the blood-stained elf was stood there on top of the body, puffing and panting. And Kroger thanked the elf, and Hyland was impressed at the elf's ability to think so well, to come up with an idea like that. They carried on their journey a bit further, reaching a sharp turn in the river. And it would have taken them hours to get around the outside of the river. They had to find a way across. But they couldn't just swim across because it was too fast flowing. They had to be careful also of the crocodiles in the river. So Hyland thought about how he could cross this river, thought about what could be done. And so using some fallen down trees, they worked together to pile them up one side. and then to carefully push trees in. And as the trees curved around with the water, they would latch the trees in place against the trees on the shore, before then getting another tree, pushing that one in further, and then having that one do the same, until eventually they created a bridge they could walk over. It wasn't very sturdy, and they had to be quick, but it got them across. And across the other side of the river they could hear the dragon in the distance. Almost like a huge, loud, roaring howl. And they continued their journey. And found a giant tree in this valley. And this giant tree had a huge crack down it. And they could hear the echoing sound of the dragon roaring under the ground. They didn't know exactly where it was, where it came from, but they knew that this must be another way into its lair. So they abseiled down the crack in the tree, and the crack went down under the ground, down through the roots, to a cave that was under this part of the valley. And the cave smelt of sulphur. It smelt of burning. And they could barely see. Kroger the dwarf had the best eyesight in low light like this, so he led the way. And the cave echoed with each footstep that they took. And they tried to be quiet and follow the sounds of the dragon. And after a while of walking around this almost pitch black cave, the cave opened out into a vast chamber, and in the middle of the chamber they could see the red dragon just lying there, resting. Hyland thought this could be our chance, this could be our opportunity to take out the dragon. He tried to sneak slowly and carefully. He remembered the words of his master, the words of his mentor. He would need to have mastered his sense of mind to be able to take out this dragon, so it won't be as easy as just walking up and stabbing him. The dragon became aware of them in his cave and flew up high into the air, powerful wings flapping noisily in the air. let out a roar as thunderous flames fanned down upon them. Hyland quickly created a magical force field protecting them. This cave was enormous. You could see the light reflecting off of the caves and bouncing off the cave walls. Hyland didn't know what he was going to do. They couldn't reach the dragon. But while he was thinking that, Fezler the elf was already halfway up a cave wall, already climbing, already trying to get above the dragon. There was a hole really high up in the cave, in the ceiling. It looked so tiny up there, and yet clearly that's only because it was so high up. Because that's the way the dragon had flown in and would fly out. And Piper ran and hid behind some rocks, keeping herself safe from the dragon. Kroger ran at the dragon, even though the dragon was way out of his reach. He just ran at the dragon, waving and swinging his thick, heavy sword, trying to take out the dragon with brute force, even though he couldn't reach him. Then all of a sudden, this long rope dropped down from above. It turned out that Fezler had managed to get high enough to be able to get some vines. And he dropped them down. They're still attached up above, but they're now lowered down to the base of the cave. It took no time at all for Kroger to decide that he would climb the ropes to get up to the dragon. So he climbed the ropes and he swung backwards, swing his legs back, stretched his legs out in front of him, throwing himself forward, stretch his legs back again, swing back, swung his legs forwards again to fly forward, until he was reaching the dragon. Then he kicked at the dragon. The dragon just kept breathing fire down to where Piper and Hyland were. Hyland circled round. Piper stayed where she was. And Hyland climbed up a rope on the other side. Piper didn't feel there was much she could do to help. She was feeling powerless at this point. Kroger leapt off the rope, landing on the dragon, and started hacking away at the dragon with his sword. The dragon's armour was impenetrable. It was as if it was just made of metal. Its scales were just impenetrable. The only soft part of this dragon was its throat. But there's no way that Kroger could reach his throat. And Kroger didn't seem to care. He was just busy trying to stab the back of the dragon. He wasn't thinking through that he might need to stab somewhere else. He just was thinking, I need to stab this, I need to kill it. Hyland just kept swinging backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And with each swing he was reaching further and further, to the point where he was nearly reaching the cave wall. So he started on his backswing, pushing off the cave wall to add extra strength to his swing. Until he was able to swing right around into the dragon. with the occasional shrub here and there, and dry grass, and hardy vegetation. And then as they continued to ascend, the hardy vegetation gave way to snow and ice. And they reached a point where the river seemed to go inside the mountain. So they followed the river inside the mountain, followed into the cave. This climbing was hard work and exhausting on the body, and took a lot of mental strength to keep going, to keep climbing, and keep pushing on. They noticed in this cave the cobwebs. Hyland walked ahead with his hand outstretched, with a glowing orb floating just above his hand, using a light magic spell to keep that orb there. And the light from the orb reflected off the walls and made the cobwebs appear to flicker and twinkle, because the cobwebs were covered in a sticky goo. Kroger told everyone to watch out for the cobwebs, try not to touch them. As a dwarf, he spent most of his life living in caves. He was aware of what this was and how dangerous it could be. And after hours and hours and hours of walking, despite trying to be incredibly careful walking through this cave, because they couldn't really see everything clearly, Hyland accidentally stepped on a piece of cobweb, and it was almost like a tripwire. It made a spider aware of their presence. And they didn't at first hear the spider because of the sound of the flowing running water next to them. But then Fezler became aware of a tapping sound. And the tapping sound was getting faster and louder. Then all of a sudden, a giant spider, about 3 times the size of Hyland, burst out in front of them, exposing its fangs with a hiss, and trying to lunge its fangs down into Hyland with his arm outstretched and the glowing orb in his hand. Hyland fired the orb forward at the spider, as all of them leapt out the way of the path and rolled on the ground and hid around a corner. Hyland fired an electric bolt from his left hand, striking the spider, which toppled on its side, but quickly righted itself again. The shiny black spider body reflected the light of the orb that was now just lying there on the floor. The orb was gradually getting dimmer without being fed with the magic from Hyland. Kroger ducked down, ran around behind the group, climbed up on some rocks, and leapt at the spider's jaws, grabbing hold of the spider's teeth, one tooth in each hand, stretching and wrenching on the spider's teeth, pulling them in opposite directions. And the spider was flexing its teeth, the spider was shaking its head and stamping its front legs up and down. And Kroger's face was grimacing and sweat was on his brow as he was using all his strength to try and wrench those teeth further apart. Until with a tearing sound, both teeth ripped out of the spider's mouth, and Kroger fell to the floor holding two venomous teeth in his hands. He threw the teeth aside and leapt back onto the spider, which by now was highly distressed and angry. Venom was dripping from the spider's open gums. And on the back of the spider, Kroger drew his sword high above his head, plunged it deep into the spider's head. And straight away the spider went quiet. Its legs just gave way and it collapsed to the ground. And Kroger, on striking the ground, just rolled off the spider, landing on his feet. He put his sword back in its sheath, and the others came out to take a closer look at what Kroger had done. Hyland then created the orb again above his hand, and they carried on their journey. They were unsure whether there were going to be any other spiders, and they wanted to find a way out of the caves. Eventually they found a way out of the caves, following the water, and found a huge waterfall So they followed Fezler up the side of the waterfall as he guided them where to reach, how to climb the side of this waterfall. They reached the top, and at the top was a vast lake of water, largely ice covered, with the water coming from under the ice and flowing down that waterfall, eventually heading down to create the river down in the valley. And around the side of the lake they could see giant woolly mammoth that would stomp on parts of the lake, breaking the ice so that they could drink. And then kicking at the snow, keeping parts of the snow low so that some of the hardy vegetation was able to survive, and they're able to eat that vegetation. And everything was a blinding bright white, with a freezing, bitterly cold wind howling across the surface of the mountains. And they trudged through the snow, pushing forward. And they saw something in the distance. It looked like a person, but with all the snow and the wind, it was really hard to make it out. They kept walking towards that person. And they kept low, and they tried not to disturb the person. They didn't know who or what it was, but they had to go in this direction. And they saw that it wasn't a person, it was a yeti. But by the time they recognized that, it had smelt them. And there's so little food up here other than the mammoths that a carnivore like this yeti would take on anything to have a meal. So the yeti turned on the group and started charging at them. Hyland took on the yeti. The yeti swung one of its arms to grab at Hyland. Hyland managed to block the arm and add a bit of extra magical strength. And some magic to root himself in place, like an immovable object. And the yeti was built solid. It's like dealing with a wall of muscle. And the yeti was about 3 times larger than Hyland. It swung its other arm at Hyland. He blocked this as well. Then he jumped and kicked hard up between the yeti's legs, knowing that normally brings down anyone. or anything, and the Yeti dropped to its knees. He then created a magic shield and swung this at the Yeti's head, whacking the Yeti round the head, and the Yeti slumped to the ground. But it slumped to the ground more just by shock and being unprepared than by actually being injured. So it very quickly leapt up and took some further swings at Hyland, all of which he managed to dodge, jump, or roll over or under. Yetis would occasionally try and take on mammoths, but mammoths were vastly too big for them to be successful in taking on. While Hyland fought against the Yeti, the others made their getaway, heading in the direction they were all going to be going. Hyland said he'll catch up shortly, and he seemed to have everything under control. The Yeti managed to get a hold on Hyland, and he threw him, and Hyland landed face deep in the snow. Had it been on any other surface, he would have got seriously hurt. But in the snow, he just sunk in head first, and it broke his fall. And because he'd been thrown so far, he had a few seconds before the Yeti reached him again to start working on another spell. And so he gave an incantation, and just as the Yeti was about to thump on his head with both fists connected, almost like gorillas sometimes pound on things, he fired with both hands a bolt of energy out at the Yeti, pushing the Yeti way off in the direction of the mammoths. The Yeti flew off hundreds and hundreds of meters before skidding back through the snow. The Yeti appeared dazed and shaken. This gave Hyland enough time to run and catch up with the others. He joined with the others and carried on until he saw what looked like some kind of old temple up here in the mountains. Looking down from the mountains on one side, they could see the cloud tops, and beneath the clouds they could notice the valley that they'd come up from. Looking down on the other side, they could see a desert. And up here, precariously at the top of the mountains, there seemed to be a stone structure. That seemed to have a temple, that seemed to have been built to worship something. And they heard a roar coming from the temple. They'd obviously disturbed the dragon here. And all of a sudden this green dragon exploded out from under the snow, exploded through the stone floor, sending boulders hurtling into the air, narrowly missing them all. And this dragon was covered in armour. as if something had fitted it out with armour. There was no way that they were going to be able to just somehow get on its neck and strike the vulnerable point in its neck. Hyland realised that him and Kroger were going to have to try and use some strength to wrench this armour off the dragon. But that means getting onto the dragon. So they climbed high up in the structures and goaded the dragon towards them, as the dragon dive-bombed them, breathing fire and flying straight towards them. They leapt through the air, landing on the back of the dragon. They couldn't actually stab or injure the dragon itself, but they both started attacking the armour the dragon was wearing, attacking the joints in the armour, as the dragon flew erratically and at high speed, flying up really high into the air before diving down really low, spinning off just before hitting the ground, twisting, doing loop-loop. And they just had to hang on, and every time they got an opportunity, they would stab at the armour, hack at the armour. And after much hacking, they managed to break some of the armour free. They still couldn't obviously penetrate the skin of the dragon. There was only one weak spot, and they hadn't yet been able to remove the armour from that spot. So Kroger held hold of Hyland's legs while he hooked his legs under the dragon's wings and leant forward. And Hyland hung around the dragon's neck, hacking and hacking away, trying to break the armour, while the dragon flew erratically, breathed fire down, trying to get the other two who were on the ground. It obviously couldn't breathe fire onto Hyland or Kroger, who were hanging on. Eventually they managed to break the armour free, exposing the vulnerable part of the dragon's neck. But in breaking the armour free, Hyland dropped his sword. So all he could do was hang onto the neck, upside down, wrap his legs around the neck. And he started punching, punch after punch at the same spot on the neck, trying to punch his hands through the neck, striking and striking. Then Kroger worked up to the neck. He wrapped his legs around the neck, reached around with his shorter arms, and tried to dig his hands into the neck, trying to pull the skin apart. And between them, with Kroger pulling the skin apart, and Hyland thumping between Kroger's hands, eventually Hyland managed to strike straight through the dragon's neck, straight into the heart of the neck. And at high speed, the green dragon plummeted from the sky, crashed into the mountain, skidded down the mountain, grinding to a halt in a heap down the mountain. Piper and Fezler came running over to check that Kroger and Hyland were okay. They needed a bit of help to get out from underneath the dragon. But they're okay. They're a bit exhausted, and they knew they now had to climb down the other side of the mountain and head out into the desert to find the blue dragon and defeat the blue dragon. And that to do that, they'll need to develop their spirit. So they started their way down the mountain, down towards the desert, into the desert realm. Dragon's Fire, Part 4. So as you listen to this, you can close your eyes and begin to relax. And as you fall asleep comfortably, so I'll talk in the background. And as Hyland and his group leave the mountains, they start to enter the desert. And descending the mountains, it starts off freezing cold and gradually gets warmer and warmer. And as they reach the desert, this desert's maintained by the mountains. It's very difficult for clouds to make it past the mountains, for weather to get past the mountains. So the other side of the mountains is a dry desert, and during the day temperatures can skyrocket, and during the night temperatures plummet, and many people have died here due to the lack of water, due to disorientation, getting lost. And so they didn't know what to expect or how they were going to do. But they had to find the blue dragon. And Hyland had used a spell to be able to track the blue dragon. That gave him a floating light that would appear when he opened his hand. And that floating light would have a brighter point to it and would get dimmer on the opposite side of it, and the brighter point would always be pointing towards the dragon. And so as they walked through this desert, it felt like they were walking for days and days without seeing any life, any signs of life, or anywhere life could be. This desert was brown, lifeless, dusty. Sandstorms would just appear out of nowhere, blanket everything, fill their lungs with sand, be incredibly hot and uncomfortable. And then next minute, nighttime would set in. guard, the ghost would strike. And this went on all night long, and they were becoming tired and disorientated. As long as they kept their guard up and they kept fighting, the ghosts couldn't hurt them. But if they dropped their guard, then they could be hurt. So they couldn't drop their guard, they couldn't fall asleep. They fought the ghosts all night long. And the next day, they're beginning to seriously run out of water. They've been being really careful with the water. They'd gathered water from the snow on the way down the mountain. And now they're beginning to run out. So Hyland did a magic spell to send a ball of light to find some water. And that ball of light shot off before stopping like a star pointing down at a fixed location in the distance. So Hyland and the rest of them started heading towards that ball of light, hoping it had found water and it was hovering over some water. That was still half a day's trek away, and so they trekked through the desert. And as they were nearing what looked like it could be an oasis in this desert, they were attacked by a load of scorpions which came up out of the sand. Where this oasis was, there was at least some moisture to sustain some life, and these giant scorpions attacked them, flicking out their barbs on their tails. And they were fighting them off with their swords, fighting the barbs with the scorpions, while also fighting the pinching claws, trying to keep the scorpions at bay. Striking at the scorpions, trying to get through the shell. And Piper, being quite agile, managed to get round behind one of the scorpions and get onto a scorpion's back. And she'd been used to being on moving objects on the ocean, and she was able to hold onto the tail and almost surf on the back of the scorpion, keeping control of the tail, directing the scorpions towards each other. And as the scorpions went towards each other, they started annoying each other and attacking each other. And Kroger managed to roll under a scorpion, slicing open its belly, before rolling under another scorpion and managing to cut off its tail. While the elf Fezler managed to fire an arrow straight through two scorpion tails at once. And the arrow had some rope on, so it managed to tie the two tails together, and he managed to wrap them up before they managed to then get over so that the four of them could get to the oasis. and in a desperate state, they plunged themselves into the water, drinking the water, splashing their faces, cooling themselves off. They were so glad this wasn't just a mirage, that it was a real oasis, with beautiful, lush green trees, grass, plants, and all the life they'd expect back in the valley, all within just a few 100 meters of a small pool of water, a small spring of water, here in the middle of this desolate desert. And they gathered up some more water to carry on their journey. And after another couple of days of walking, they suddenly noticed a rumbling beneath their feet. And the rumbling grew and grew. And then, almost like the sound of thunder, the ground exploded from underneath them, throwing them back. And the blue dragon burst up from under the desert, high into the sky. This blue dragon, it was in the night, and it was glowing. And this dragon wasn't like the dragons they'd encountered before. This one seemed to have an almost corporeal sense to it. It was partially see-through, it was glowing, and it seemed more ghost-like than solid dragon-like, and yet it had thrown them off and been able to cause them harm. This dragon flew around, dived down at them, breathing fire. And the fire was like an electric blue colour, striking the desert ground, turning the desert to diamond as it struck. They realised it was striking with intense heat, an intense electrical heat. And the four of them dived out the way and managed to get clear of this. And they swung at the dragon as it flew past. But the swing at the dragon didn't do anything. The swords just went straight through it, like with the ghosts. And then as it dived down at them again, Hyland said to the others that what they're going to have to do is lure it in so that it stays physical and unexpectedly strike at the end. But this was going to require a lot of trust on the behalf of all of them. So as the dragon swooped round, back high again, ready for another pass, Kroger hid himself down into the desert, hid himself under the sand. Hyland stood just in front of Kroger. And the dragon swooped around and dived down towards Hyland. And Hyland just stood there and stood there. Behind his back, his hand prepared, a protective shield around, ready to put around himself if he needed it. A protective personal force field. And he stood there and he stood there, and the dragon was leaving breathing fire until the last minute, until it was in the perfect position, and the dragon was going to have to be solid to breathe the fire for it to have any effect at harming them. And as it got really close and was just about to breathe fire and strike Hyland, Kroger leapt up and stabbed upwards from under the sand as the dragon flew over him, stabbing straight into the vulnerable part of his neck, just while the dragon was solid, halfway through about to breathe fire. And at that exact moment, Hyland made his shield solid as he was knocked flying by the dragon that was directly in front of him. The dragon landed and skidded and rolled across the sand. And then materialized into a solid blue dragon. No longer like a spirit, but like a solid dragon like the others they had taken on. And it died. And Hyland thanked the others for their help and for their trust. Especially thanking Kroger for his help and his timing. And Kroger thanked him back, because as a dwarf, he hasn't been trusted very often. So to be trusted like this, with your own life, is a huge thing for the dwarf. And having dealt with the dragon, they continued their journey to get out of the desert into the next realm, into the realm of night. And although it was night time now, it's night time for good in the realm of night. And so they headed to the edge of the desert, walking for another few days before reaching the realm of night to take on the purple dragon. Dragon's Fire Part 5. So as you listen to me, you can close your eyes and you can begin to relax and begin to drift comfortably asleep. And as you drift comfortably asleep, so I'll be talking in the background. And while I'm talking in the background, you can just imagine this story as I tell it. So as Hyland and the group pass through the desert, following defeating the blue dragon, they enter in the realm of night. Now the realm of night is in permanent darkness. Light never shines here. Sometimes it takes on a very slight twilight kind of lighting when the sun's attempting to be at its peak height in the sky, but almost no light at all reaches the ground. It's almost in permanent darkness. And it never used to be this way. It used to be a lush land of meadows, villages, but now there's just permanent night due to the giant black cloud that hangs overhead. And every now and then the black cloud will rain down black ash all over everyone. And it all comes from a nearby volcano. And Hyland and his fellow travellers are looking for the purple dragon. And to defeat the purple dragon, they need to develop their magic skills. And Hyland needs to develop his magic skills and improve them. And he's already had a chance to use them with other dragons. He's had a chance to use them in other situations on his journey. But he needs to develop his magic skills even further to be able to defeat the purple dragon. And the realm of night is one of the most dangerous parts of the land. There are vampires roaming around the land. And there's no escape of daytime because it's permanently dark. And after night set in, something happened that led to many of the villagers who survived the vampires being turned into zombies. So they have to tackle the zombies and the vampires and somehow make it safely to the purple dragon to take on the dragon. And as they walk through this permanent night time, they can hear and feel the crunching of the ash on the ground beneath their feet. And they can see the outlines of the buildings, all the deserted buildings of the towns and villages they pass through, and notice belongings just strewn everywhere on the ground, all deserted, all signs that life was once here but is no more. And the zombies largely leave people alone unless they become aware of you. They just walk around, moving slowly, conserving their energy. But if they become aware of you, They attack like ants in a forest. They'll signal to each other with grunts and whistles and sounds. And charge you en masse, making it very difficult to protect yourself from them. And the vampires hunt any life. Just like big cats on an open savanna, stalking its prey and hunting its prey. And they've been known to hunt in packs too. So they pass through this zone, they pass through this realm as quietly and as carefully as they can. And Hyland practices his magic, carefully thinking of different spells, testing different spells. And he casts a spell to encase the four of them, that makes it so that light seems to travel around them so that they're invisible, to help them to be able to get through densely populated areas of zombies unnoticed. As long as they don't touch the zombies and they don't make a noise, they don't draw attention to themselves. And they have to sneak really quietly. And the vampires also can't see them when they're like this, but they have to stop and rest at some point. And although they can stop and rest in a location that's safe, perhaps in one of the houses where zombies can't get into them, vampires have far more intelligence, and they can just go and open a door and have a look. And so they reach a point where they need to rest for a while. And they can't light a campfire because that'll draw attention. So they rest in a building where they can be a bit warmer in the building. And they don't have anything to eat, and so they're getting quite hungry. And they can't cook anything. And while they're in the building, they hear a slight tapping and scratching sound outside on the roof. And it sounds like maybe just a small bird, but they have a sense it's something worse. Then they hear some more tapping. And then the tapping becomes almost like the sound of rain. There's just lots and lots of repeated taps. And so Kroger decides to go out and have a look. And as he opens the door, in bursts a vampire, almost gliding in through the door. And Hyland projects a force field out in front of them all, towards the door, to keep the vampire at bay. And the vampire just walks towards the force field and is pushing himself against the force field. And there's a crackling sound as the vampire's just leaning on the force field. And more vampires start appearing at the door and start pushing against the force field. And Hyland has the force field wrap around the door like a U shape, blocking the doorway, protecting Piper, Fezler and Kroger and himself. And the vampires start pushing and pushing and building up more and more vampires. And the force field starts to fail with the amount of vampires pushing against it. And Hyland's aware he's got to perfect his magic. So he's trying to think, what spell can I use now? What can I do next? And then vampires start entering in through the window. And within seconds, there's 30 or 40 vampires now cramming into the room. And they're all getting squished into the corner. Kroger, Piper, Fezler and Hyland. They're running out of room in the corner, trying to protect themselves with the force field. They don't know how many more vampires are outside. Hyland then has an idea. He lets the force field start to collapse closer and closer to themselves. And he starts to darken the force field. And just as it's about to reach them, and most of the vampires he thinks have probably come inside, he fires a ball out into the centre of the room, which explodes with a bright, brilliantly bright light, as bright as the sun, with all the qualities of the sun. And all the vampires suddenly turn to dust in an instant. But this gets the attention of zombies, and zombies now start storming on the place. So they have to dive down into a basement beneath the building. Hyland uses a spell to make the ground collapse behind them, sealing them in the basement. And Kroger starts hacking his way through the rock. He's used to having to do this. Hacking his way through the rock to get away from that area. Hacking a path through. And every now and then, the zombies manage to get up behind them. Just pushing through the rock, through the rubble. And occasionally a zombie will appear out of the rubble. And Fezler keeps them at bay with his arrows, firing, shooting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, just shooting the zombies as they appear. And together they manage to get enough of a lead ahead of the zombies that they can then collapse the rest of the tunnel and start rising up to the surface. As they collapse the rest of the tunnel, rise up to the surface carefully and quietly, breaking through the surface. They don't want to draw further attention to themselves. And Hyland makes sure everyone gets out safely before using a magic spell to turn the collapsed rubble into concrete. Making it so that it can't be broken through easily. It can't just be moved like loose rubble. They continue their journey hunting for that purple dragon. They see glistening on the ground with each in and out breath, this purple dragon just resting there in the distance on the black ground. So they go over to the purple dragon. And as the purple dragon becomes aware of them, it rises its head up. And as it does so, its body glows purple. And it fires out purple pulses of energy from its mouth before taking off into the air, hovering there, bending its neck forward and bursting out purple pulses in the direction of the four of them. They'll jump out the way. Hyland then uses magic to create an artificial dragon up in the sky opposite the purple dragon. This distracts the dragon momentarily, giving Fezler an opportunity to fire a few arrows at the dragon. He doesn't fire them to hit the dragon, he fires them to miss and go around the dragon, with rope that can tether the dragon in place and try and bring the dragon back down to the ground. The dragon fires a purple bolt down towards Fezler. Just as he does that, Hyland creates a protective shield of magic between the bolt and Fezler. This gives an opportunity for Kroger to climb up one of the ropes and get on the back of the dragon. And he's whacking the back of the dragon, trying to get the dragon's attention, trying to make the dragon disorientated, trying to make the dragon so that it makes a mistake. And Piper climbs up the other rope and joins him, and climbs up onto the neck of the dragon and onto the head of the dragon. And the dragon's flailing its head around, and Piper's hanging on, almost like hanging on to a bucking bronco. And she's covering the dragon's eyes and disorienting it. And Hyland uses a spell to try and bind the dragon with magic, creating magical chains that bind the dragon that begin to weigh the dragon down and pull the dragon down. And the dragon continues firing out its purple pulses of energy, striking the black ground. All the commotions drawing zombies towards them, getting the attention of vampires. Hyland then drops to his knees, closes his eyes, focuses all his attention on all of the zombies and vampires, and he starts to emanate a green wave that spreads out from him, starts spreading out across the land, spreading across the zombies and across the vampires, getting into their minds, where he starts to take control of their minds, almost like being the leader of a hive of minds. And he starts to make it so the zombies start to ignore them and instead go for the dragon, and the vampires fly up and go for the dragon. And having hundreds and hundreds of zombies jumping all over the dragon, climbing all over the dragon, dozens and dozens of vampires piling onto the dragon, attacking the dragon, forces the dragon down to the ground, where Hyland manages to stab it in the throat, killing it and making it fall to the ground dead. And as it dies, a purple mist seems to come off the dragon, out of its throat, out of its mouth, like purple smoke spreading, and it seems to infuse with Hyland, almost latching on and going through Hyland's magic and Hyland's green waves that he sent out, and infusing and passing into Hyland. And he can feel the dragon's soul passing into him. He can feel the dragon's magic filling him and becoming one with him, giving him additional magic abilities. And the zombies and the vampires are still going crazy around the dragon, still focused and intent on what they're doing. So the four of the others take the opportunity to get away while they can. And they leave the dragon, they head towards the volcano, towards finding the Book of Enlightenment, so that they can bring down the black dragon and end this reign of darkness that had begun across the land with these dragons. Dragon's Fire, Part 6. So as you listen to this, you can close your eyes and begin to relax. And as you relax, so you can drift deeper and deeper asleep. And while you drift deeper and deeper asleep, you can imagine this in your mind and just drift off to sleep with what I'm saying. And as Hyland, Fezler, Piper and Kroger leave the night realm, they enter into the death realm. This is the realm at the base of the volcano, the realm where very little life ever manages to survive. And they know somewhere here is the Book of Enlightenment, and that they need the Book of Enlightenment to be able to know how to defeat the black dragon So they start walking over the ash-strewn ground, crunching on old lava flows, noticing the glowing light of new lava flowing. And occasionally lava would just fall from the sky. In scalding red chunks of rock. Sometimes rock as big as houses would crash down, having been ejected from the volcano. Other times, fast-moving clouds of hot gas and dust would just flow faster than the speed of sound down the side of the volcano, destroying anything in its path, stripping people from ordinary living beings to just skeletons and dust in a matter of seconds. This was a dangerous area to be. So as they walked around on the lava fields and found their way, trying to find their way to the volcano, to the top of the volcano, where the black dragon will be, they needed to know where in this volcano the Book of Enlightenment is. They knew that the black dragon had made sure that it was almost inaccessible, and had made sure it was where it chose. And so they hunted around and found a cave into the volcano. And it was slightly safer in the cave because at least they weren't going to be hit by anything falling or by any fast-flowing gas and dust plummeting down the side of the mountain. But they still had to deal with earthquakes, with lava flowing inside, with noxious gas. They walked and explored. And they came upon a tunnel, and they followed this tunnel. And as they followed this tunnel, they heard thudding footsteps. They didn't know what it was going to be, but they knew it was unlikely to be anything good. And then a cyclops appeared in front of them, claiming to be protecting the way to make sure no one got through to the dragon. And the Cyclops hurled huge rocks at them, and Hyland created magic shields to protect them from the rocks. And Fezler went running in. A rock came flying by. He chopped it in half with his sword, which was so sharp and narrow. He jumped up, landed on top of another rock, bounced off that rock onto another rock, before landing up on a ledge higher than the Cyclops. At the same time that he was doing that, Kroger ran in, dodging rocks, sliding under rocks, rolling left and right, barrel rolling forward, and managed to get underneath Cyclops. And Fezler jumped down, dropped down towards Cyclops' head, just as Hyland fired a beam of light out at Cyclops' eye, disorientating him, stopping him, noticing and paying attention to what's happening. And Kroger jabbed upwards and cut into the top part of Cyclops' legs, slicing into both legs, collapsing Cyclops to the floor. As Fezler landed on Cyclops' head, stabbing his sword straight down through the head, and Cyclops fell to the floor motionless. And the four of them kept on their way, running deeper into the volcano. They could feel the increasing rumbling and the excruciating temperature which was rising the deeper they went. And through another chamber, they realized this was no ordinary volcano, because this chamber looked like it had been made intelligently. And they realized this volcano was something different. It was almost like a giant Egyptian pyramid, just somehow it was like a volcano as well. And Grendel burst out from nowhere, totally unexpected, and started to attack them. And Hyland was using magic and firing magic at Grendel, and nothing was working. And Fezler slashed with his sword and cut and jabbed and jumped around and seemed to be making no impact at all. It was barely affecting Grendel. And Kroger, with all his strength, was ramming Grendel, attacking Grendel, and none of it was working. And then Piper just sat down and she started to sing. She just sat calmly down and started to sing. And Grendel clutched its ears in agony and fear and pain, and started ripping at its own ears. And Piper just calmly carried on singing. And Grendel started whacking its head against a wall. And started almost like it was as if its brain was starting to explode inside its head. Almost like it was trying to release pressure. And then suddenly its eyes rolled back in its head and it dropped to the ground. And Piper stopped singing. And they carried on their journey. And Kroger was surprised why the singing worked. And yet all their aggression, their strength, couldn't seem to cause any harm at all. And they reached a black wall, an incredibly smooth black wall. And Hyland touched the wall, and felt like there was something behind it, but they didn't know how to get through it. And they touched around the wall and felt around the wall, till they noticed one part of the wall was just ever so slightly different temperature to the rest. So Hyland touched that bit of wall, projected some of his purple magic through his hands into that bit of wall, and the wall opened up. And the other side of the wall was a pedestal, and on a pedestal was a book. And on the book was written Book of Enlightenment. And this room was a vast gold chamber with just that one book in the centre. And Hyland went over, took the book and opened the book. He opened the first page, and there was just a mirror on the page. He opened the second page, and there was just a mirror on the page. He opened the third page, and there was just a mirror on the page. He went through now, a bit agitated, opening every page, and every page just had a mirror on the page. He threw the book to the ground angrily. He was supposed to have been able to find the answer. He was supposed to be able to find the Book of Enlightenment that would tell him how to defeat the Black Dragon. And all he found was a book that said it was the Book of Enlightenment, but there was nothing in it. He thought to himself, maybe someone had been here before. Maybe someone had managed to get this far before and had planted this book or removed everything from the book so that all was left was mirrors on each page. Fezler took a look at the book, angry, thinking, what was all this journey for? Thinking maybe something was missed, but nothing was missed. It was exactly as they said. Kroger demanded an answer, demanded, what's this all about? What's happened? What does it mean? Hyland apologised, said, I don't know. He suddenly felt helpless, suddenly felt like, how could he make the rest of his journey without knowing an answer? He then started flicking through the book again, turning each page, looking through from the front to the back, looking through from the back to the front, looking at the back cover, looking at the front cover, looking at the spine, trying to find some clue as to what this all means. He then just slumped to the floor, sat leaning against the pedestal, closed his eyes and started crying. And within a few minutes his crying turned into laughter, as he suddenly realised the answer. He was suddenly aware of what it meant. He opened the book again, and he realised on every page was himself. And that he had to look inside himself, that his journey has given him all the skills. He just needed to know that he needed to look inside himself. that the enlightenment comes from knowing yourself, knowing your purpose, knowing your role. He took the book. They left the chamber, carried on their journey to find the black dragon. He didn't really know or understand what knowing yourself was going to do to help. But he knew that that had to be the answer. It just instinctively felt right. Down the end of a very long corridor, they found this narrow tunnel heading upwards into the volcano, with just a ladder to follow. They followed the ladder up higher and higher into the volcano, before coming out in a chamber near the top. And this chamber was full of magma. It had lava spewing up over the top out of the volcano. And then rising out of the magma chamber, rising up from within the magma, was the black dragon. The magma started bulging, and then the dragon's body could be seen breaking the surface of the magma. Jet black dragon that looked incredibly smooth, like marble, raising up, filling the chamber. It breathed in and then breathed out intense fire towards them. They all jumped out of the way and hid. And Hyland knew they had to work together to bring down the black dragon. They couldn't see any sign of anywhere that they could attack on the dragon. The dragon's throat wasn't like the other dragons. It didn't appear to be glowing. It didn't appear to be vulnerable. This dragon was just jet black all over. They jumped on the dragon, hacked at the dragon, got whacked by the dragon's head, flying across the room. After a few hours of fighting the dragon unsuccessfully, they were exhausted. Piper tried singing to the dragon, which was working at irritating the dragon, and seemed to be having some kind of effect. Kroger decided to use his strength. He jumped on the dragon and tried to hang on, and tried to get at the dragon's neck and get up over to the dragon's eyes, and use his strength to try to crush into the dragon's eyes. Hyland started using his magic on the dragon to try and create chains to drag the dragon down. And Fezler started trying to use his intelligence to find a smart way of taking out the dragon. He was firing arrows at overhanging rocks to try and make them fall on top of the dragon to bring the dragon down. While they're all fighting, Hyland got struck by the dragon, flew across the room, whacked his back on a wall, landing in a heap on the floor, with the Book of Enlightenment bouncing out of his bag and landing open on the ground. The dragon shied away, turned its head away from them. Hyland noticed this and realised maybe there's something about the book the dragon doesn't like. He held the book, ran over in front of the dragon, opened it up and held it out in front of the dragon. The dragon turned its head from him. He realised the dragon seemed to be turning away from its own reflection. But the book was too small, so he used magic to create a mirrored wall that encircled the whole inside of the chamber. And everywhere the dragon looked, it could see itself staring back. This jet black dragon staring straight back at it. It fired its breath at the dragon in the mirror, and its breath just bounced back and hit itself. And it started firing its breath more and more, and it was spinning around faster and faster and faster, spinning faster and faster, firing its breath, and its breath just kept bouncing straight back at itself, and it started to burn itself, catch itself on fire. And it turned out only its own breath could destroy itself, and its desire to try and remove its own image was what was bringing it down. And eventually, it heated itself up so much by constantly firing at itself. It started to go from being jet black to glowing red, then glowing orange and yellow, then glowing white, before finally exploding across the inside of the magma chamber. And as it did, and the dragon's remains floated down into the magma, so the magma began to dry up and turn to ash, and began to turn black and solidify. And the volcano went quiet, and the mountain went quiet. And the four of them climbed out of the volcano onto the top of the volcano, and they saw the cloud of ash and dust falling to the ground, raining to the ground, but it wasn't being replaced with any further ash and dust. And the sun began to break through the ash and dust, and for the first time in thousands of years, began to reveal the land below. And the death realm cleared up to just being a mountain among other mountains. And the night realm had daylight for the first time in thousands of years. And the vampires had to go and hide back in the shadows. And they realised they'd cleared up the land. They dealt with all the dragons, fixed all the realms, and they can go home. So Piper, Hyland, Fezler Then Kroger left the volcano, went back through the desert, back to the mountains, over the mountains, back through the valley, and finally went home to the coast. And Hyland thanked Fezler for his help as he went home up on the plateau, thanked Kroger for his help as he went back to the other dwarves in the caves, thanked Piper for her help as she went back to the rocks. He went back and he checked on the wizard and the health of the wizard, and checked on the village and saw how much it had been rebuilt already. They'd been gone for quite some time, and they were pleased to see him. And he was so happy when he finally got to go home, go in his shack, get back into bed, and finally, in a long time, fall asleep and have a proper night's sleep, knowing that he left on his journey as a wizard's apprentice, and he's now returned a full-blown wizard in his own right.